Welcome to Inside Academia, the weekly program where we take a look behind the ivory curtain seeking a frank discussion of American education. I'm your host, Andy Nash. My guest today is Mr. Andrew Ferguson. Formerly a senior writer for the Washingtonian magazine, he has been contributing editor to Time, as well as a columnist for Fortune, TV Guide, Forbes FYI, National Review, Bloomberg News, and Commentary. He's currently senior editor at the Weekly Standard and author of the incredibly popular book, Crazy You, One Dad's Crash Course in Getting His Kid into College. Andrew Ferguson, welcome to Inside Academia.
Well, thank you for having me.
First, I want to just bring up the question of the admissions process. In one of your previous interviews with Brian Lamb from C-SPAN, you mentioned that the book is not so much a how-to guide for getting admitted into college, but rather a survivor's account of the admissions process. Can you elaborate on that? Can you give us some examples?
Yeah. I think the best way to put it is it's not a book about how to get into college, but about how to survive the process of trying to get into college without a homicide taking place somewhere within your family, which is always a danger during this very stressful time. I actually was not expecting it to be the way it was, as complicated, as expensive, as sort of encumbered with all kinds of extraneous obligations and hoops you had to jump through and hurdles you had to jump over, because it was, as I say, so different from my experience, and I think the experience of most people who now have college-age kids. But, you know, essentially it was a matter of riding away to a school that you thought you liked, getting a little form back and filling it out and sending it off, and then getting admitted or not, as the case may be. I think I applied to 3 schools total, and I think that's pretty normal for the people who went to school in the 70s. The way I figured or saw that this thing was totally out of whack from what it was before was I was asked to go up and write a profile of a college counselor in New York named Kat Cohen. She has a nice office in Midtown Manhattan, and she invited me to go up to see her give a seminar to a bunch of high net worth individuals, as they're called, which is the euphemism for rich people, very, very rich people. And there was this room full of extremely, almost basket cases of these wealthy parents who had been obsessing about this since their kids were, in 6th, 7th grade. They'd assembled portfolios, resumes for the kids. My son at the time was about to become a junior, I think was a junior in high school, and we hadn't done anything like this. And these people were toting around tapes of their kids' athletic performances or piano recitals and recommendations from several different parents and friends and teachers and so on. The thing that really blew me away then was that she was going to charge these people who enlisted her services $40,000 to help their kids get to college. And I realized then that I wasn't in Kansas anymore, basically.
$40,000, that pretty much rivals the cost of most colleges. One of the things that you asked in the book, how did it become this way? That was one of the perennial questions you kept out. You even asked her, Kat Cohen. How did it become so competitive? And at first she didn't seem to really answer your question. She always took it as though everything in life should be competitive and cutthroat necessarily.
Right.
What did you discover that gives you any idea as to what the answer to that question is?
Well, the sort of boring answer has to do with demographics. Just to put it very briefly, the colleges really exploded after the GI Bill after World War II, and then the baby boom came along, and by the mid-70s, schools had vastly expanded their capacities to house and teach kids. They built lots of dorms and laboratories and libraries and all that kind of stuff. And then the smartest ones of them, starting in the early 70s, looked down the road a little bit and saw a demographic trough. In other words, they were going to start losing customers at a very rapid rate because the number of college-age kids was going to drop. So they utterly changed their industry. They turned it into an industry, in effect. Higher education became a huge business, I think now $40 billion business. in the United States. And they grabbed every tool of marketing that they could, of direct mail and hiring people to write ad slogans for them and taking out advertisements, all this kind of stuff that had never been a part of higher education in America. And it was basically because they were trying to fight over a limited number of kids. And then that competitive pressure has survived, even though the number of kids going to school is now higher than ever before. The competition part of it has remained the same and incredibly intense. The thing that I was surprised at was, I guess I wasn't too surprised to go see Cat Cohen and see these very wealthy people trying to get their kids into Harvard or Yale or Brown or Princeton or whatever. But that's sort of, you can understand that as an old, as a rich person's obsession, indulgence even. But the thing had trickled down all the way into the middle strata of income in America. Certainly, I'm not a wealthy person, but all of our friends were scared to death about what they were facing there with these kids, and they were getting solicited by schools. And, I mentioned in the book that I think we started getting literally hundreds over the course of several months, mailings coming in through our mailbox. There were these huge, they call them view books now. They're like big pamphlets, and they're incredibly high quality in their production values. They're printed on this thick paper like the leaves of a rubber plant, so you don't know whether you're supposed to read it or slurp it like a giraffe. And this is basically solicitations of kids.
So it sounds like higher education has ballooned into being a multi-billion-dollar business, but the admissions process, everything from soliciting to marketing to all the way up to the enrollment, is in and of itself a big part of that industry.
Yes.
You mentioned in your book, I believe it was U.S. News and World Report in the early 1980s started college rankings.
Right.
And if I recall correctly from the book, you cited that as the genesis of all this and how it has ballooned to being this big thing. And in your opinion, this commodification idea of college and shopping around for the right college for all these different criteria, has this helped? Is this a good thing? Give us some of your if you think there are any pros or cons to that.
Well, just first about the U.S. News, I don't think that it was, U.S. News rode the crest of the wave. I don't think they created the wave. I'm actually quite in favor of U.S. News. I think that it gets a bum rap. Everybody in higher education pretends to hate these college rankings, and they say they're destructive of educational values and everything. And then when the new issue comes out in August and they have a nice mention in there, they wave it around like it's a garter belt, right. At a wedding. But in fact, what U.S. News has done is open up the process and allowed the information to flow out to parents in a way it was never available before. That is part of the commodification of the thing. And I suppose, in a sense, it's inevitable in a country like ours, which is extremely wealthy, which runs on personal ambition, and which can pretty much commodify anything. You can turn anything into a package and put a bow on it and sell it. And this is what's happened to higher education. I suppose we should say a good half of the people who go to college don't have to worry about going to a selected college. They pay $10,000 a year on average. They don't acquire a huge debt load. But so I'm talking about not a rare experience, but something for, I'd say, only about half of the college-age kids really go through.
One of the things you mentioned in the book, you compare college to when you attended in the 70s to what it is today. And one of the things that you sort of lament is how there's an erosion of the core curriculum, particularly in the liberal arts and the humanities. Do you think that this sort of commodification of college, looking for getting your ticket punched, has contributed to that sort of erosion, because many students don't look for that kind of an intellectual enriching experience when they go there in the first place?
Right. Well, that is partly a function of a larger confusion that we have as a society, I think. I hate talking like America as a society, but I'll do it. We as a society don't know what we want from higher education. On the one hand, the system as it is was sort of built to emulate the continental version of education in which you familiarize yourself with the best that's been thought and said in your civilization, and you sort of marinate in things of the spirit and grow and nurture your spiritual and intellectual life. But on the other hand, we're America, and we want this to pay. So on the one hand, it's a system built for something that they can't deliver in the way we want it. So we want job training. We want a piece of paper that can help our kids get a job when they walk out of the ivy-covered brick buildings. And that's part of the thing that it's a confusion that trickles down everywhere. The core curriculum is one of the casualties. When my son, not to spoil the ending, but my son did get into school, into college, and he ended up having to take a writing class, a remedial writing class, which I guess most of the kids do nowadays. And he was offered, I think he had a choice of 3 classes. One was a history of the 1960s, introduction to television's Mad Men, and an intro to queer theory. And what is offered throughout the catalog is our little specialized obsessions of the professors themselves. The idea of a core curriculum or large survey courses, in fact, simply don't exist at a lot of these schools. In fact, I think it's safe to say at most of them now. And that's partly because we don't know whether we're doing job training or we're nurturing the spirits of young people.
But yet there's this competitive cutthroat race for everybody to try to get into college. And as you say, the mission is so unclear. One of the things that you mentioned was that admissions offices of many universities have these proprietary secrets as to how they go about concocting whatever formula they use to admit students. How did you go about discovering that, if they are in fact secrets?
Well, it's a black box, really. College admissions is, if you go school by school. Higher education in America is a huge and highly competitive industry run by people who don't think they're competitive and don't want to work in an industry. But they are, and they are in, as you say, cutthroat competition. And as competitive enterprises, they have their proprietary secrets. And I can't blame them, actually. I mean, if I were at Kenyon and I was trying to get the kids that are going to Oberlin, I would end up, I wouldn't want Oberlin to know how I'm going to take their kids away from them, as it were. Most of these colleges, especially the selected ones, are non-profit. And, we're not out to make money. We're not under those kind of commercial and competitive pressures. But as a friend of mine who studies philanthropy likes to always remind me, the term nonprofit is a designation of the tax code. It is not an operating philosophy. And when you get further into these colleges, you see that they are all about maximizing revenue and minimizing cost, just the way General Motors is.
That's a very good example, because they're looking at maximizing revenue, but reducing the cost half of it, they necessarily do very ineffectively, given the things that they spend a lot of public money on.
Well, I should say they're trying to
universities.
Yeah, I think I misspoke. They're trying to keep their own expenditures down.
Yes. But they do so at the cost of, or at the expense of, quality education in many cases, unfortunately. At least that's true in many of the, for the vast run-of-the-mill majority of students, unless you're in an honors program somewhere, the vast majority of students they have to really go out and find their own education by being relentless advocates for it and of it.
Absolutely, and that's what I've told other parents. I think I say in the book that I had literally hundreds of conversations with parents over the course of our 18-month ordeal. Hundreds of conversations about how to get your kid into school. Almost none about what the kid was going to do when he got there. And that's a dereliction of duty, I think, on the parents' part. I mean, it may be that since parents are spending so much money on this process that they may not want to know. I mean, it may be just a defense mechanism. But I think they might be kind of shocked to see what was going on. give an example. You can really tell a lot about the whole process by going on one of these college tours. They tend to all become the same after a while. But the one thing you notice is academics is kind of mentioned.
Yeah.
It's there. But what they really want you to see is this fantastic climbing wall that they just put in the gymnasium, where they want.
Pool.
Yeah, it's a pool and the wood-burning pizza ovens in the cafeteria.
If universities are reduced to these consumer transactions, and the consumer doesn't want to put a premium on education and intellectual enrichment, then I guess you could say they're giving them what they want, right?
Well, in a sense, yeah, and that's why they are boastful about how much money their kids can make when they graduate. And it's not just school by school. I'm talking about the entire apparatus, the entire edifice of higher education now has a huge propaganda machine at its heart, relentlessly pounding home the idea that everybody should go to college, regardless of ambition, regardless of intellectual capacity or curiosity. Everyone should go to college, and they generate all kinds of figures to say why people who go to college will end up making a lot more money, and I think the figures are generally accurate. But it's a huge propaganda machine advocating for themselves, and extremely self-interested, as self-interested as any profit-making enterprise.
In less than a minute, you see how college has changed from when you attended to the way it is today. If you had a forecast 20 to 40 years out, how do you think the face of modern universities in America will look?
In less than a minute? Well, there are two big things happening right now. One is that there is kind of incipient revulsion at how much it costs at these selective schools. The very top ones will always be expensive because you're not buying an education, you're buying a pedigree, you're buying something to brag about, you're buying status. And as that kind of pressure builds, I think that the bubble that is higher education costs now is going to deflate in probably very serious ways. Secondly, what's going to be there after that bubble deflates is going to be determined by technology, where people are suddenly going to realize that if I want to take a great class from a classicist at Harvard, I shouldn't have to pay $55,000 a year. I should be able to go online and for some fee be able to watch his lectures the way we're doing here. And that is going to exert a kind of pressure on schools that they have never had before.
Andrew Ferguson, author of Crazy You, One Dad's Crash Course in Getting His Kids into College. Thanks again for joining us today.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Okay, I'm Andy Nash. This has been InsideAcademia.tv. Please join us again next week, as every week, as we take you for a look behind the Ivory Curtain.